Well, I mean, obviously, that will have very serious implications for the government's effort to fight AIDS, right? Because if drug users know that a rehab center might be raided by the police, I'm sure many people knew that it happened, right? Word got around the community, right? Then they're less likely to go there. They're less likely to get treatment. Yeah. And then if they don't get treatment, they won't learn about how to prevent HIV/AIDS. So human rights abuses can speed up the spread of HIV/AIDS by making those people more marginalized and pushing them more out of the reach of government programs that can save their lives. And this is actually how I first got in touch with the professor, was because I came here to assist some local NGOs, some Indonesian NGOs, that had done a big research project documenting human rights abuses against IDU, against drug users. And what they had done is they had interviewed over 1,000 drug users around the whole country. So like 13 cities and about 100 or 50 to 100 drug users in each city. And to interview them about their human rights abuses. And of those, it was 1,109 IDU, and 668 reported that they had been beaten or tortured by the police. 668. And this ranged from, you know, the police officers slapping them around, to beating them with a chair, to beating them with a wrench, you know, a car wrench, pulling out toenails, sexual abuse, so a range of different kinds of abuses. And in most cases, and this is very common. I mean, it sounds bad, but it happens in many countries. It happens in many countries. Because drug users are people who are on the margins of society. A drug user disappears for 5 days, their family may not even know they're gone, right? If the police comes to them and says, you need to give me, you know, 200,000 rupiah or I'm going to beat you with a wrench, they're not going to call a lawyer, right? I mean, these are people who are out of reach of they don't have that kind of power. And so they're very, very vulnerable to that kind of abuse. But of course, the effect of this is that it drives these people away from any effort to reach them and to inform them and to save their lives. And then the last place, as I mentioned earlier, where human rights come into the health problems is in prisons. Because as I mentioned, you know, prisoners don't tend to have very good health care. So if they're HIV positive, they might not find out right away, right? So if you don't know you're HIV positive, you might continue to do things that are unsafe, like having unprotected sex or sharing needles. They're in a place where there may be drugs if the prison is corrupt. Happens, right? And so they may be sharing needles within the prison. They may not have access to condoms. And so prisons are often places where HIV is spread very, very rapidly. So all of these rights abuses not only drive people underground, it adds to the stigma and the discrimination. And so the last thing I'm going to tell you about is about the discrimination, because that's something I've done a lot of research on in different countries. So for instance, in China, I interviewed young men, mostly young men, some young women, who were former drug users or current drug users who had HIV. And I will never forget this one young man who was about 19 or 20, so it's probably about the age of some people here. And bright young guy, an artist, and was a drug user, and became HIV positive, lived in a small town, and his family found out, and they kicked him out of the house, and then the village found out, because why has he been kicked out of the house? So then the village said, you have to leave the village. They didn't even want him to stay in the village. So he is forced to go and live in a big city called Kunming in southwest China. And in Kunming, he didn't have a job. He didn't have any connections. He didn't have any friends, right? He was completely alone. He tried to go to a hospital to get treatment because he began to feel sick. The hospital said, you're HIV positive, and so we won't treat you. And then he called every hospital in the city, and they all said, we're not taking someone who's HIV positive. And so when I met him, he was quite a young man, had everything to offer to his country, to his society, and he was waiting to die. He said, I have nowhere to go, I have no one to turn to, and I just want to go somewhere far away so my family won't be affected by what happened to me, and just wait to die. And of course he was using drugs again, because in a situation like that, he had nothing else to turn to, right? So he was using drugs, he was sharing needles, he was spreading HIV. And so cases like this give you a sense of how human rights abuses, if you're a victim of a human rights abuse, you're usually not a victim of one human rights abuse. It's usually many layers of abuse, right? That all combine to make the situation worse. Or like a woman, sometimes it affects more than one generation. So a woman that I met here in Jakarta actually a couple of weeks ago, and her case also very common in other countries. She was a former drug user, had become HIV positive, went to a rehab center, stopped using drugs, and subsequently had a child. The child was not HIV positive, the child was HIV negative. So she has a child, but even though she's not a drug user anymore and her child is perfectly healthy, the school found out she was HIV positive, and the school said, we will not accept this child. We will not take this child into the school. And she went to other schools, and other schools also refused to take the child. So because she is HIV positive, her child is being denied his right to an education, right? So that human rights abuses sometimes go through multiple generations, right? They affect several generations of family. What will happen to this child when he grows up? Will he be able to get a job? Will he be a productive member of society? Or will he also be driven to the margins of society and unable to work and maybe forced to do something illegal to make his living? Maybe he will start to use drugs, right? So human rights abuses fuel the epidemic. It's possible to fight these problems. This is why human rights groups exist. In Indonesia, you have wonderful human rights groups like LBH, Kontras, right? You have wonderful NGOs working with drug users, working on HIV/AIDS. There are people in the government who are pushing for change, right, at every level of society. So you have a democracy. You can vote for officials who will fight the epidemic. So there are many ways in which it's possible to fight for the human rights of people who are marginalized, and all of these are critical to the fight against HIV/AIDS.
We have been here for, well, basically 1 hour, and we have listened to the extensive as well as update information on the human rights and AIDS. So for the students of the Kejahatan Narkotika, please take in mind that you have to report our lecture today, and combine with the reading materials, and please make sure that you return back to us next week. And for all staff as well as other students, thanks very much. And as I mentioned before, that we will have another lecture series in the November 10th. We have another Americans turn up. Yeah. But the topic will be on journalism or about the media. So, on behalf of the Department of Criminology, Meg, thank you very much. And this is actually the small.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And if you return back to Indonesia, please stop by to this campus, and we will welcome you back Monday.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Terima kasih.